his great, powerful arms, and he held me in place so that I would have to watch the darkest parts of my life and my heart become exposed with light. I believe very much that in the heart of many men with addictions, particularly sexual addictions, that there's a 10 or 12-year-old boy in there who is screaming to love me, validate me, and let me know that I have what it takes to be a man. And there's a saying in the church that sin will take you farther than you ever wanted to go. That is true. I am blessed to have been seized by the power of a great affection. Thank you. Good evening to you, friends. The person standing before you was an adulterer, a liar, and a hypocrite, and an apostate to the church. But I have been seized by the power of a great affection. And I have been wrapped in the arms of a God that loves me deeply. And before I get much further, I do want to offer an apology. I want to apologize to the church, and not just a celebration, but to the body of Christ, and to my family and to my friends, for the pain and hurt that I have caused people, and for not giving the due reverence to the cross that it really deserves. This is a story of a roughly 24-hour period from July 14th to July 15th of last year, which God both seized complete control of my life and showed me great affection all at the same time. He literally held me back with his great, powerful arms, and he held me in place so that I would have to watch the darkest parts of my life and my heart become exposed with light in order to break me because he loved me. And in those same arms, he gave me love deeper than I could imagine. And I need to offer a warning because of the range of ages of people that we have in here about the nature of this testimony. I am in no way going to go into anything inappropriate. No inappropriate details. And I in no way discount the severity of what I've done. But the purpose of this is not to tell about what I have done, it's to tell about what God has done. Although the former is simply a necessary part of that. And although every fiber of my being is screaming to run to the hills right now and never show my face again, I know that I would be doing God a great disservice to not tell what he has done in my life. And I also don't want to use up too much time by talking about my childhood. I believe that stories of the many of the men with sexual addictions are similar, and mine is no different. I believe very much that in the heart of many men with addictions, particularly sexual addictions, that there's a 10 or 12-year-old boy in there who is screaming to love me and validate me and let me know that I have what it takes to be a man. And in the absence of that, Satan has an open door. I need to point out that some of what I might say tonight might seem very obvious to a recovery crowd. And some of you guys at times might be like, duh, Todd, we know that. I understand that. But please understand that I'm also talking to people through a podcast, through the video, and potentially future CFers. So your patience in that is greatly appreciated. A little of background about me. I am 46, married 16 years to my beautiful bride, Cindy, there. We have 5 kids together, great kids, despite their parents. I've been a musician most of my life, primarily a bass player, so this whole guitar and singing thing is way out of my comfort zone, and it's very much a labor of love. I was saved at the age of 16, and quite honestly, that was little more than fire insurance. And with the advent of the internet and everything that the internet offers, porn became an easy, addictive, and the medication of choice. And I say medication because it was exactly that. Some choose to medicate with alcohol, some choose to medicate with drugs, sometimes with other people. And porn fulfilled that purpose with me, to fill a void, to escape, or gain what seems like validation at the time, but it is a lie. It is a vicious, vicious trap. So a little setup about my 24 hours of transformation last year. Through the mail, my wife received an anonymous postcard. And on that postcard was an allegation that I had been having an affair with the lead singer of the band that I was in at the time, which was wholly untrue. It was not true. However, as you can imagine, it caused lots of concern and lots of questions with Cindy, as it should. And over the stretch of several days, that opened the door to confession and very much fear. And in my need to keep control of that situation, I really only cracked the door to that confession about who I really was. All of that led to an eventual separation. And there's a saying in the church that sin will take you farther than you ever wanted to go. That is true. And I hope that there is some shaking, some nodding heads right now, because it's true. One of the things that I learned about that statement was when, on the Sunday morning that I had to tell my kids that Dad was leaving. And I had to tell them why I was leaving. Because I had betrayed their mother, I had broken our marriage covenant, and that I didn't know what was going to happen. Certainly not the kind of thing that you ever want to look at your kids in the face and say. Another time that I realized that sin had taken me farther than I ever wanted to go, when I was sitting in an empty room at the Washington County Health Department waiting to take an STD test. Very humbling. And sin will take you farther than you ever wanted to go. So that separation that left me in the place where I had to find a place to go. Again, very, very humbling. One of the downsides of being a loner is that you build very high walls to keep other people out so that they don't know who you really are. And because of that, I had a myriad of acquaintances in my life. People that knew me in a very shallow way, very, very few friends. But at Cindy's suggestion, I called one last person. And God was very much watching over me even then, because it was a pastor friend of ours who has a brother who lives right next door. Both he and his wife are both teachers, so in the summer, they have a lake house somewhere in the area, and in the summer, their house is basically empty. And they were kind enough, I gave him a call, and he said, let me make a few phone calls, and then a little bit later, he called back and said, you have a place to stay. Even then, God was watching over me. Now, on to the 24 hours of transformation. During this time, I had talked to Rogers and others about advice and counseling, etc. And Roger had suggested that I talk to a guy named Paul Corbett. And I think he was with Tri-Cities Christian Counseling. I can't remember. Is that okay? He was with Tri-Cities Christian Counseling. Keep that in mind. On Saturday, July the 14th, Sin found another place that had taken me farther than I ever wanted to go, because I was scheduled to have a meeting with Robert Russell after the Saturday night service. Not fun at all, to lay out all my crap there and have to look your pastor in the face and meet up with that. But I remember very specifically that he prayed for me at the end of that session, and he prayed for a spirit of seduction. He prayed against a spirit of seduction for me. And that word, seduction, had never come up during the entire conversation that we'd had, and we talked a long time, probably about an hour and a half. And the word seduction had never come up. So afterwards, keep that in mind as well, by the way. So afterwards, I'd called Cindy to tell her how the meeting went. And she said that she wanted to meet me at the Shell station up here at the intersection of the airport road. And she had told me that she had gone to the gig of the band that I had just quit, and she confronted her. She told me that she was even sorry that she did it, but she felt that she had to. And while we were sitting in our van, our family van, talking about the events of the night, my cell phone rang, and it showed up as an unknown number. And considering the events, that had just happened, we freaked out, thinking that it was her. And with that, we had made a decision to go back to our home. And even then, Cindy was watching out for me, trying to protect me. Once we were there, things quickly, I don't know if the word is escalated or de-escalated into the pit, but it became very tense and very ugly very quickly. I remember standing in the corner of my kitchen and looking at Cindy, and her eyes were black with rage, and she was beating me on the chest in rage, an absolute total rage. And at that moment, our home phone rang, and it was her. The phone call lasted quite a while. I remember standing in my living room and looking to the kitchen and seeing my wife talking on the phone to this other woman, and realizing in full that I had completely and utterly no control. The reality was that I never had any control. Control was an illusion at best. Sin had taken me farther than I'd ever wanted to go. And this isn't in my notes, but I'm going to add the sin. I remember that Cindy, at one point, was talking on the phone with this woman, and she was telling her that God loved her and that she deserved better than this. Think about that. I mean, really, think about that. As the phone call went on, the other woman threatened to send all the emails that I had sent to her. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Amen? That phone call eventually ended, and the total shock and the numbness began to settle in from the whole situation. There was no sleep that night, as you can imagine. But the next morning, she had indeed forwarded all the emails. I left that morning from our home emotionally and physically spent in complete shock of the events of that night. That morning, I decided to get up. I didn't sleep. I laid around or something. I decided to go to another church because I obviously could not go here. And I picked a church pretty much at random. It turned out to be University Parkway Baptist Church down in Johnson City. And I walked in and picked up a bulletin, found a place pretty much away from everybody as I could. And I'm looking through the bulletin, which is up on the screen here. And if you see the title of the sermon for that day, it says Soul Detox Part 4, The Seduced Soul. And if you remember, Robert Russell had prayed very specifically for a spirit of seduction against me. And as I continued, that was freaky, by the way. And as I continued to look through the bulletin, I'm looking through the staff in there, and I can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm looking through the staff, and right there in the left-hand column is Paul Corbett, counselor, whom I had just made an appointment with earlier in the week at Roger's suggestion for the next Tuesday. There is no doubt that God was setting me up for transformation. Now, after hearing all of that, here is where things get interesting. You were supposed to laugh at that. That afternoon, I went back to my refuge house in shock and overwhelmed by everything, the events of the prior evening and that morning. And I remembered that I curled up on the couch in that house that was not mine, and I grabbed a pillow and I laid there for hours, frozen in complete and total fear. I called a friend of mine. His name is Mark, who took charge of the situation. He told me to get up. He told me to take a walk, to write in my journal, do something, do anything. Just don't lay there. That he would be over as soon as he could. So I did. I got up. And I took a walk. I came back and I started writing in my journal furiously. And I started filling page after page after page with the events of the night before, days before, pouring out thoughts and fears out of my heart, which culminated in these 2 paragraphs. And I don't expect you to read that because it was written in great emotion, so I'm going to read it for you. But why would God have us go through all this just to leave me and our family destroyed? There has to be something greater for all this. There has to be. All I have to cling to look forward to, is seeing a redeeming plan come to life. God has shown me a spirit of callousness, a mighty strong spirit of callousness. The things that I was able to do and still come home and still look Cindy in the face. Am I a monster? How could I have gotten to this point? The downward spiral is so horrid. I had hit bottom. God had revealed my filth. He had flooded my life with light, and it hurt. The thing about a hole, and it doesn't matter if you're 10 feet tall or 10,000 feet tall, once the top of that hole is out of your reach, you're helpless. But it's that space after those 2 paragraphs that God showed up. And he changed from holding me back with his great and powerful arms to force me, watch my world come crumbling down around me because of my own selfishness, to arms of love and grace. And here's what happened in that empty space. After writing those 2 paragraphs, I decided that I needed to pray. So I was sitting on that couch, that same couch, and I uncrossed my legs and I put my hands down to my side and I tried to relax as much as I possibly could. And I sat there and prayed. And somewhere in the depths of Romans, it says something about God will hear the groanings of your heart, and he knows what that is. And that was very much my prayer. I was just pouring things out, and I have no idea what I was saying, and I know that my heart was groaning. And I sat there and prayed for a pretty good while, a good while. And at some point, I don't know if anybody remembers last year, and I don't expect you to, but I'll give you a quick reminder. During the summer of last year, particularly in July, there would come these great downpours in the late afternoon that would rain like half an inch or more. Just incredible downpours and thunderstorms. And that Sunday, July 15th, was one of those days. By the time I had got back from my walk and got into my prayer, it was pouring outside. And as I'm praying, God told me to go outside and stand in the rain. And much probably like you're thinking right now, you're thinking, I thought that is crazy. Why in the world would I go stand out in the rain in the middle of a thunderstorm? Why would I do that? But I'd hit bottom. I had nothing else to lose. So I went outside of the house that was not mine, and I stood on the front porch in the downpour of rain as cars were passing by. And I stood in that rain and I prayed, wash me in the water of your Spirit, over and over and over. Wash me in the water of your Spirit. And I stood there and watched the cars go by, praying this prayer, being washed in the water of the Spirit over and over and over again. And I don't know exactly why it was that prayer. I remember at some point that Barry Smith, I had talked to Barry Smith at some point before, and he had recommended that I pray for a baptism of the Spirit. And I think that was as close as I could get at that moment, to wash me in the water of the Spirit. And I stood there for a while, and eventually I thought, it's time to go in. There's no angelic choir. There was nothing. There was no clap of thunder, and the sun parted through the clouds. It was just simply time to go back in. And once I got in, I realized that God was saying, are you going to listen to me now? Do you trust me now? And I really think it was a test of obedience to do something that seemed crazy, odd, but do it anyway and be obedient. Afterwards, I had called the guy next door who was kind enough to loan me the house, and I asked him if he had a few minutes. He came over and I answered the door, dripping wet. And I said, have I got something to tell you? Later, my friend Mark showed up with much of the same results. We had talked for hours about that experience and what we thought was next, and neither of us really knew. But I knew that I was filled with peace, and that I was able to function, and that I was going to trust the God who loved me, and that He was going to redeem me, just like His Word promises. That no matter what the consequences, if there's anything that I've gotten right in all this, it is this, that the cross is enough. That there is nothing that I can do to add to it, to make me enough. I believed it because that was all I had. And it was really after that event that the walls began to be torn down, to open up about who I really, really was, and to begin the recovery process. As a side note, there's a popular saying in the men's group here at CF, that your first day of freedom, of really having it all out, of having the weight of it all gone, is your spouse's first day of hell. And it's true. Not only did it begin my recovery process, it began Cindy's as well. And I remember during that time that God gave me several visions or mental images in those early days of recovery. One was that I very distinctly remember seeing the hand of God, and in God's hand was my heart. And I remember seeing the vision of stone falling away from my heart as God gently squeezed. I found out later that is actually scripture from Ezekiel 11:19. And I will give them singleness of heart and put a new spirit within them. I will take away their stony, stubborn heart and give them a tender, responsive heart. I also remember having a vision at the time of being on an altar. And Jesus was standing over me with a sword. And I remember that it terrified me because I thought that I was going to lose myself, that I was going to lose my identity. That I was going to lose the very thing that I had put on the altar, that it was the worship of me. Several months later, I remembered that I'd had that same mental image again. But this time, it did not put fear in my heart. And I remember very distinctly thinking, that's exactly what needs to happen. And I was okay with it. I completely and wholly trusted Jesus standing over me with that sword to cut out what was unholy. So I started going to a Monday night recovery group at that University Parkway Baptist Church in Johnson City. That following Monday night, they were just starting The Bondage Breaker by Neil Anderson. It was yet another sign that God was setting me up for change out of His love. I also began talking with counselors and people through the week to help find and deal with the core issues so as to break the cycle and to deal with who I really, really was and why. I also began CF, Thursday night CF, here at Celebration. They were also just starting a brand new study in the men's group. They were starting a book called At the Altar of Sexual Idolatry, and I want to take a minute to talk about that book. It is a very, very hard-hitting book, and it was very, very appropriate for me at the time. It put in black and white, directly in front of my face, the things that I was afraid to admit about myself. And for somebody that needs recovery, that is looking for recovery, that is very necessary, to have it in black and white right in front of you to face exactly what it is that is distancing you from God. And along with these things, with lots and lots and lots of reading, anybody that has been in recovery knows that there is lots and lots of books to read. And I read a lot of them. One of them that I did and finished was Neil Anderson's 7 Steps to Freedom. And I want to speak for a minute about that. That was very, very, very beneficial to me. What it does is it basically forces you to put down on paper your crap. And there were sections of it that had little to do with me. Never really had much to do with alcohol or drugs. But when it came to the pride section, cha-ching, 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 and I went down the list, and it was all me. It got to the sexual stuff, cha-ching, 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 it was all me. Checkbox after checkbox after checkbox. To look at it and call it for what it really is. There's another section in that book where you very specifically pray against very specific spirits, that you ask for forgiveness for very, very specific people, so that the enemy no longer has that power over you. It is a long and painful process. I would highly recommend it. Despite all this, I do not want you to think that any of this was easy and that everything had fallen into place. This was a very, very, very hard time. Cindy would call me up at work or in the middle of the night, several times a day, and understandably so, in deep rage, deep, deep sobs of despair and pain. And it was hard, and it was ugly, and it was real, and it was light shining in very, very dark places, and it hurt like hell for both of us. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is probably not what you think it is. You might think that it is the story of David and Bathsheba and his adulterous affair with her. I can certainly relate, but that's not it. You might think that it's Paul on the Damascus Road and how the scales had fallen from his eyes and he could see the full glory of God. That's something else that we talk about in the men's group, and it is true, but that's not it. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is out of Mark, where Jesus lands, takes a boat with a couple of guys, and they land on the shore of a cemetery. And there's a guy living there, a man living there in the cemetery, who is holy and totally possessed. And for people that don't really see that as a recovery story, sometimes it can seem like the climax of that story is when Jesus asked the man what his name is, and he says, Legion, for there are many of us here in this man. And it kind of brings up visions of the exorcist and spinning heads and pea soup and, etc. But that's not what it is about that story that gets me. What it is about that story is that Jesus shows up. And Jesus, if you're familiar with the story, Jesus tells this legion of demons to leave this man and go into the herd of pigs. And the pigs end up running off a cliff down into the lake that they had just come from. So here we have a recovery story. We have Jesus who shows up when he's needed most. We have a man who has been healed, yet he is still living in an overgrown cemetery filled with death, stinking, nasty. You have a herd of dead pigs floating in the water, which is the consequences of all of our stuff, isn't it? And then you have a whole town full of people that come to watch it all fall apart. If that's not a recovery story, I don't know what is. But the great thing about that story is when the guy tells Jesus, he says, I'll follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says, no. Go and tell the world what God has done for you. For the sake of time, I'll keep it short. We did reconcile. I moved back into the house, and we have continued our road to recovery. Some days are better than others, to say the least. And as time goes on, the good days do eventually outnumber the bad days. That's a family that stayed together because God showed up. We absolutely know, and we have seen the hand of God in my recovery, in our recovery, and in our marriage. Our marriage is a story of revelation, of light, of forgiveness, redemption, and healing, and it is not finished yet. That's a picture of a porch swing. My beautiful bride gave me that porch swing on July 15th of this year, the anniversary of my front porch experience. You'll notice that it's a two-seater. I like that. I like that part about that swing. Many of you in this room may hear what I've said tonight, and you may be thinking to yourself, let's never, ever, ever have this guy to play cards over on Friday night. And I totally get that. Totally get that. But let me tell you about my bride. I know that I will never find greater reflection of God's love and forgiveness on this side of heaven than in my bride. If you ask her why she didn't leave, if you ask her why she didn't listen to her heart screaming that she did not deserve this, forget all this, I don't need this, she will tell you that God didn't tell her to. Think about that. Think about how you would feel. Would you be listening to God? I don't know. But I know that my bride did, and I am very thankful. She chose to listen to God and remain faithful to Him and to me. I see in her the pinnacle of God's creation, of beauty, of grace, and of strength. She is my bride, my beloved, and my treasure. We are carefully joined together in Him, becoming a holy temple to the Lord. I'd like to say a little bit about CF. CF is not the answer. It is the redeeming love of Christ that is the answer. But when your life is falling apart all around you, when you walk through life with that deer in the headlights look and you have no idea what to do next, CF has a place in your life. CF is not perfect, but it is better than pretending that everything is okay when it's not. It is better than thinking that you are in control when the reality is you're being controlled. We spend a lot of time talking about the doors to CF and how difficult it can be to walk through the doors on any given Thursday. Probably even more so for the people who actually attend celebration, because the same doors that anyone and everyone walks through any other day of the week suddenly become massive and heavy stone doors that are seemingly impossible to open. We understand that. There is a stigma, whether spoken or not, that walking through the doors of celebrating freedom implies failure, that I don't have it all together, and that I need help. For a prideful person like myself, that can be prohibitive. Another fear is that if I do show up, I know that I'm going to be the person with the biggest problems in the room, the biggest loser, the greatest sinner, the one who is totally saturated through and through with filth and ugliness, and that if anyone really knew all the crap that I had done, they wouldn't let me in the door anyway. Know this: you will be surrounded by people who have lost. People who have lost battles with addictions, lost relationships, they've lost loved ones, they've lost dignity, and they've even lost all hope and faith. But we stand back up after being knocked down, and we turn to the power and the love of God of all creation, and we realize that we cannot fight alone, because we tried that, and it didn't turn out so well. We realize that we are in desperate need of an advocate, a redeemer, and a community. Celebrating freedom simply invites you to not fight alone. To wrap this up, and with that in mind, I'd like to share a few things that I've learned about recovery. Accept love. Accept help. Take advantage of people who have stronger backs than you for a season. God truly puts those people in your life for a reason. Some people in your life will simply vanish when trouble rears its ugly head. But others will run to your side, and some will come completely out of nowhere. Some of the people in my life were Tip, who is the pastor friend of mine who found a place for me to stay and has spent lots and lots of time talking with me, hours and hours talking with me. Another friend of mine is Mark, who I mentioned. We spend a lot of time together, and even now, all this time later, we still meet every Wednesday night after the Wednesday night service at the McDonald's in Bluntville. and we meet and talk about what's going on. He's my accountability guy. Barry and Linda Smith and Gert Vanderwitz Heitzen, those three had scheduled for me a Saturday afternoon, that they had taken time out of their Saturday afternoon to spend easily 2 hours of nothing but praying over me. They gave me their Saturday afternoon. They gave me their strong backs when I didn't have it. There's a friend of mine named Eddie who I don't believe is here tonight. I remember walking into the CF in Bristol one night when my world was falling apart, and Eddie made the mistake. Eddie recognized the deer in the headlights look in me, and he made the mistake of asking me if I needed to talk to somebody. And we spent the next hour and a half locked up in a little small office in that little church, and I absolutely destroyed a whole box of Kleenex in deep, deep, painful sobs of grief and pain. But I'm thankful for these people, to the people and to the men in my group that I've been with here and at the recovery group in Johnson City. And to the people that have come to Cindy's side. There was a story. There was a group of women that came from here at the church. They came over to the house one day when I was gone, when we were separated. And they brought with them a whole arsenal of toy weapons. And those women went through my house and around our property, and they prayed for spirits to be gone. They prayed for spirits of healing in our house. And if you go into our kitchen, even today, and you look above the window and above our kitchen sink, there is still a little plastic orange squirt gun that sits above our window as a reminder that we are always in a spiritual battle. And I'm going to tell you something that you might find surprising. Although I am greatly and keenly aware of the pain that I have caused my wife and my family, and I deeply regret what I have done, I do not regret that it all came out. It was only by exposing all of my filth that I was able to truly know and experience God's love and forgiveness. These days, if you ask me how I am, I will likely reply that I am blessed. I am blessed to have been seized by the power of a great affection.